Thank you very much, Luna. It makes me sound very old, doesn't it? I am glad to have the opportunity to speak about this exhibition. I've had the opportunity to look at it, which some of you will have had, many I hope, but it's only been open a short time. But I think you will find not only that it is an exceptionally stimulating exhibition, but that it's beautifully installed. It really is. And that can make an enormous difference in our appreciation of the art. I am not going to let myself go off script too often tonight. It's easy to do, especially when I start with my title, RobyReal, for this talk. I'll explain that in due time. It's probably obvious from the beginning. The great gift of the Sara Roby Foundation Collection arrived at this museum in 1985. The gift was made, it started coming in, it took a while for it all to get here, but soon much of it was on view in the inaugural exhibition, and the inaugural exhibition was a tantalizing one. Those who were already familiar with the art in the Sara Roby Foundation Collection, which were not that many, because they had seen it only in traveling exhibitions, of which there were numerous ones that the foundation had sponsored. But most people seeing it were not familiar with it, and if you only knew it slightly through photographs and publications, it was the source of delight, surely, and admiration, and for some like myself, a sometimes puzzling, quizzical experience as well. Since then, the collection has been integrated into what is now the Smithsonian American Art Museum's previous and subsequent holdings of 20th century art, enriching it in many ways. But the range of the Roby collection, the whole range, hasn't been seen as fully as it is in the current exhibition for a quarter of a century. There were, as I mentioned, the traveling exhibitions that the Roby Foundation had sent out before it came here, and this museum also sent out a traveling exhibition in 1998-99, which went to a number of American museums and was very well received at that time. Sarah Mary Barnes Roby was born in 1907 in Pittsburgh. Her father was a wealthy industrialist. She attended private schools in Philadelphia. She was briefly at Vassar. She then decided to study painting at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and became a painter of still lifes and landscapes. In her 30s, she continued to study painting, now at the Art Students League in Manhattan, where her teachers were Kenneth Hayes Miller and Reginald Marsh, whom I'll show you in a moment. Marsh had himself studied with Miller, the older man. And these two painters, together with their emphasis on mastering traditional techniques and compositional methods, had the greatest, the greatest influence on her taste. Pardon me, I'll get some water. The photograph of Kenneth Hayes Miller, who was born, I'm going to take a major cough there, who was born in 1876, was taken in 1934. So he was, how old? 34 and 24, 48. He was, it's a very formal studio photograph that you see here, one that justifies the observation that he was also called K.H. I don't think he was ever called Ken, but it has a certain look of a businessman about him here. You will see one of his paintings in the Roby collection. He was not an exciting painter, but he was an excellent teacher from all accounts and had a terrific influence upon many young artists who attended the Art Students League. Reginald Marsh, born in 1898, died in 1954. This photograph is undated. could probably be dated by anyone who knew exactly what picture we see a detail of behind him. He painted Coney Island Beach many times, and this is one of them that you see behind him, obviously very large, almost mural-sized painting, but I don't know which one or where it might be, but it makes a lovely play against the seated figure of Marsh. Sorry. In 1952, with some of her inheritance that year, she established the John Barnes Foundation, named for her father, to further the appreciation, creation, and understanding of the visual arts. This is a pretty vague premise, but the kind of thing one finds often enough when a foundation is new and you want flexibility to define it as it goes along. And that rather vague premise was given needed focus around 1954, when she met Lloyd Goodrich. She was seated next to him at a dinner party. He was then the associate director of the Whitney Museum, and he was a very noted and important figure in American art scholarship and museum work by that time. Lloyd Goodrich was born in 1897, and he lived until 1987. He was a prolific writer on 20th-century American artists, and when Roby met him, he was already the principal authority on Thomas Eakins, the great 19th-century realist painter. Goodrich suggested that Roby and her new foundation begin to purchase the work of living American artists whose art embodied form and design. Great general, to be sure. But this was not a casual suggestion, because Thomas Eakins was always on Lloyd Goodrich's mind. Thomas Eakins had had only one solo exhibition in his lifetime, and he did not and could not support himself by his art for a variety of reasons. The result was that although he'd had many fine students and students who frequently worshipped him as a teacher, Eakins' art had not gained widespread public acceptance of any sort. It was only the 1917 exhibition at the Metropolitan, which followed his death in 1916, a memorial exhibition which began to introduce him to the public and allowed people like Lloyd Goodrich to take up the cause of that. That catalog, that exhibition and its catalog in 1917 was arranged by Bryson Burroughs. He was both curator and a painter, and as Goodrich wrote in 1982, I was a friend of Bryson Burroughs and a lifelong friend of his son-in-law, the painter Reginald Marsh. I had never known that until recently, and there is the connection between Eakins and the 19th century realism and the power of some of the 19th century realism in American painting and the 20th century realism that developed from it and was influenced by it. Well, Goodrich and Marsh talked a lot about this, and they conceived the idea of a full-length book on Eakins. Goodrich couldn't afford to quit his job to write it, and so Marsh loaned him $500 to start writing it. And they worked together on this, and this is something to keep in your mind, the importance, as it were, of Thomas Eakins in this in this whole mix that we're talking about with the Roby collection. Roby shared Goodrich's ideals, form and design, and she favored figurative representational paintings. Favored, but not exclusively. In part, in the early 1950s, those of us who remember the early 1950s, this was not a rejection, but, well, implicitly a rejection of the newly rising abstract expressionism. At a time when the battle lines between realism and abstraction were sharply and didactically drawn, much more than they need have been, but it was real cultural wars, cultural art wars at that moment. As a result, the Sara Roby Foundation Collection came to be identified with realism in art. Now, if you've ever been pressed to define realism, you know the difficulty of doing so, whether in literature or in art. And if you think you know what realism is, this exhibition may confound you. I'll put up an image now and talk about it in a moment, but we need something besides that photo. Just bear in mind that Sara Roby, who was always called Sally by those who knew her, which I did not, she was not predictable in her affections for a particular sort of art, and not only bought the occasional abstraction, but looked at everything and embraced a remarkably wide range of styles and expressive content. In short, American realism has always seemed to me problematic, whether it's in the title of this exhibition, they used it in the Roby Foundation as well, or whether it's just used generally. It can be a problematic thing. So when I was sort of faced for the first time with writing about this, about parts of this collection, I came up with a shorthand, which I actually used on my file, which said RobyReal. And I've decided as the years went on that anytime I encounter a piece of a piece of art that is under the realistic or realism rubric and doesn't quite seem to me to easily fit that, I just say, oh well, it's RobyReal, and that sort of solves a great deal. So I don't have to beat this dead horse too long, and I won't, but keep it in mind as you see the remarkable range of things. Now, beginning with this work from 1961 by, as many of you would know right away because it's almost his signature style, it's a Will Barnett called Sleeping Child. And it is a large painting, and it is, of course, realistic, or is it? I mean, we know that it's a sleeping child, we know it's a mother and child, we know what else? We know that and not much else at all, actually, including anything about the third dimension. This is one of the most insistently flat paintings imaginable, and much of his work up to this point, and including this, was in this highly design-conscious, patterned, flattened method. The outlines of the figure, the outlines are, could I have the house light, or maybe not with the taping down a little bit, I was going to say. It's hard for me to see the images, but the spotlight. This painting is perfectly descriptive of the feminine forms. The curves are all there, but none of the roundness. There's no projection. There's no difference, indeed, between whatever they're sitting on and the wall behind it. By the way, they're not sitting on a ledge because it goes down in the middle. It's a mattress, perhaps, something of that. There is a concavity in the center under the figures. But modeling is almost done away with, and with it, any sense of roundness, of volume. That's a part of realism in many people's vocabulary. I'm going to go back from that 1961 painting to this wonderful painting by an artist named Isabel Bishop, who was born in 1902 and lived until 1988. She is a contemporary of Sara Roby's. It is called Mending. It was painted in 1945. It's oil on fiberboard, about 25 inches high. Bear in mind that when you're dealing with this big screen and you see these big images, that they're very, very small. Some of them is very small indeed, and it is hard to imagine them down to size. Isabel Bishop was born in Cincinnati, raised in Detroit, but at 16 moved to Manhattan to study illustration, but she soon turned to painting, and she studied with Kenneth Hayes Miller at the Art Students League. She's a wonderful artist, was a wonderful artist, whose vision was intense and private, though her subjects are usually found in the midst of New York City. specifically Union Square, where she established her studio for most of her life, and where she found her subjects either in her studio or out in the square. It's a remarkably narrow and intense focus that she decided on. And in this painting, she discovers and captures, I think with extraordinary discernment and tact, a poor man who is sitting by a public fountain in the square, mending his clothes, seated near that fountain. The tremulous surface, this vaporous surface, monochromatic or nearly so, in itself creates a kind of aura which preserves the privacy and the dignity of the man. This is typical of her approach to her subjects. She was so extraordinarily sympathetic and empathetic to these figures whom she often painted singly, as you see it here. Reginald Marsh, whose photograph we've seen and whom we know was the teacher of a couple of people now, was a wonderful painter as well. He was born in 1898, as I said, and I'm going to show you a very typical subject because he was a devotee of Coney Island, and in this case it was one of the amusement parks on Coney Island that gave him the subject, as it were, for a painting called Jorge Toulouse Steeplechase. Toulouse, the name of the man, I presume, who owned this particular steeplechase, and it's spelled T-I-L-Y-O-U, and I'm not sure how it's actually pronounced. Reginald Marsh painted this in 1932 in a mixture of oil and tempera on linen. He often painted only tempera because around 1929 he was introduced to the tempera medium, and he adopted it and he taught it to many other people and introduced it to friends among his artists, among artists he knew as well. And there is a whole generation, really, of tempera painters who arise in American art between about 1930 well, for the middle third of the century and beyond, since Andrew Wyeth lived beyond and kept painting in tempera most of that time. It is a medium which found wonderful new artists to work in it. This is a 30 by 40 inch painting. There were three amusement parks on Coney Island, and Steeplechase Park was one of them, and Jorge Toulouse was one of those steeplechases. The steeplechases were mechanical horses racing around the pavilion of fun on, indeed, on iron rails that were sometimes as much as 35 feet above the ground. A merry-go-round on steroids. I mean, we think we invented extreme sports. There aren't any seatbelts here. You see the rails, I assume, here that they're riding on. And what you see, of course, first and foremost is the sailor and the girl on the horse. This is one of the steamiest paintings imaginable. He painted others. The paintings radiate sexuality. It's not just sensuality, it's sexuality. And the two of them are one. The two of them are nested, and there's the most extraordinary thing that happens that I'm sure you've seen. You lose the leg of the sailor for a while because he's so close to her, and so you suddenly associate her leg, stockinged leg, with him for a moment until you discover his leg back here. It's intentional, and it's fun, and he just makes them as much one as possible. And then you look at the ambiguous look in her face. I won't interpret it. It's just sets a whole, it stops the thrill for a moment, turns it another way. And then there's another detail that I had not noticed in the past, and that's the woman back here riding a horse alone. And that is a look of envy and jealousness at the good luck of the woman with the sailor. as you look at this blown up, at least from where I am and where many of you are close up, you almost see the technique too much. You almost see the linen underneath the paint surface. That you'll get used to. But when you're in front of the painting, there's a much more harmonious look to it. As I said, he painted Coney Island, and he did so for, well, most of his life after he started painting it. This is a painting from 1951, Coney Island Beach, oil on fiberboard. Here he has turned to oil. It's large, and it's signed, and that's a little bit surprising. This is a 30-inch wide work, and it looks like a study. It doesn't look like, to me, like an unfinished painting. It looks like a study for another painting, yet he has signed it and dated it and presumably sold it, yes? So that means he considered it exhibitable and finished in that sense. But when you look at it, you see a strange melange of figures, some scantily clothed, some not at all, which I just know they didn't do on the beach of Coney Island. And you know also, if you think about it, that this is a studio picture, no matter how much sketching that he did on the beach. He didn't paint out of doors. So it's done in the studio, it's invented, it's putting together the sketches that he made. And that's why you end up with, for instance, this very notable nude in the foreground, who looks more like a mannequin almost, a pretty well-developed one, I agree, but nonetheless, there's not a lot of life in this figure, and she is the one figure that seems, among the women, who seems very, very classical. In that sense, I mean Renaissance sculpture, more clearly ancient, antique sculpture, poses that he has copied from casts and seen, and reinterpreted, as it were, at Coney Island. There are, you know the game, back here, playing war with the women on the shoulders, trying to, and here successfully, she pushes off her opponent. There is the man who was her rider, who is pushing against the other man who looks absolutely vengeful. That look is scary on his face, just scary. And this figure, the figure of the falling woman, is a highly erotic figure in itself. All of this going on, and by the way, ships at sea, do you see in the background on the right? So we've got the horizon there as well. In the foreground, or the middle ground if you prefer, on the right-hand side is somebody I never would expect to meet there, and I don't know why he's there. He's a man with a very, very long beard and a hat to protect him from the sun, but not much else to protect him from the sun. And he's there in pure profile, which usually signifies something. You know, you have the feeling that he's going to hold forth something portent. And this woman seated on a stool is looking at him in a listening fashion. I have no idea what Marsh is getting at here or who this figure is supposed to be, but I know that he certainly has caught my attention with him. I'll return to him probably at a later time, but let me look now at a piece of sculpture. And the only sculpture I'm showing you, not because I don't like sculpture, and not because I think it's the only sculpture in the Roby collection that is worth looking at, far from it, although the bulk of the collection is aimed at pictorial work rather than sculpture. But boy, the Yugo Robust, if you don't know Yugo Robust, and it's not surprising if you don't, but it's a shame that he should be much better known. Yugo Robust was born in 1885 and died in 1964. He produced wonderful sculptures, many of which he couldn't afford to cast until much later because he didn't have the money to do it. He cast this one in 1934. That's the only date I know for it. The wood base is part of the original conception. It is, if you've seen it, you know it's life-size, but it seems smaller than life-size. This is about 44 inches wide here and 29 inches high, approximately. It's called, and it's a wonderful title, One and Another. That's worth the price of admission right there. one and another, that he thought that he understood, that his conception for this, well, it is about conception after all. It's about birth, about birthing, and about the wonder that the mother has in seeing the other, another person, one and the other. And it's done with, you must walk around it and around it and around it. We can't go to the video here, you see, but you have to see it from all points of view. He's given you a marvelous points of view, and at the same time, a marvelous visual experience of turning around the torso of the woman. Realistic, there's not a wrinkle on her. She's as smooth as a Brancusi. And she's as smooth as Paul Manship. When you go to the exhibition and walk down the Manship corridor there, look at the three bears. You see very Art Deco, done in the same decade, very Art Deco surfaces that are smooth, but this to a much different point and a much different effect. And he turns this figure. It's complicated, it's twisting, it's a spiral, more complicated because she kneels. And as you walk around it, you cannot help but marvel at the perfection of his developing views. There just nothing is missing. Brancusi meets Bernini, and I don't throw either of those names out casually. This is a remarkable achievement by a too little known sculptor of immense ability. Arthur Garfield Dove, 1880 to 1946, associated in most people's mind from art history courses. If you have met him in 20th century art history courses, you will have, of course, because he's sometimes credited with being our first purely abstract painter around 1910, 11. In there, around the same time, Kandinsky was credited with being the same in Europe. And it's arguable whether either of them produced an actually pure abstraction at that point, but we used to always say so in school. And that became what he was known for. Well, this painting, done later, and the group of 6 paintings are all very small, and they were all the gift of his son about a decade after, to the Roby collection, about a decade after the death of Arthur Dove. And they're all, well, this one is 5 by 7 inches watercolor. Oil Tanker 2, Roman numeral 2, 1932. I will just repeat about the early career of Dove. You know perhaps that he was associated with Alfred Stieglitz and the several galleries that Stieglitz had in the early part of the century that were so amazingly, of the last century, so amazingly important in the introduction of modern European art to America and modern American artists to Europe and European artists. This work of 1932, done later, when he was living as he did much of his life near the water. He and his wife, his first wife, lived in fact, in a houseboat for a long time. So the water was very much, it was cheap rent, and the water was very much a part of it. So this oil tanker, almost like a child's drawing, except more complicated, and we can't quite put it together, especially if we never saw one that looked like it. And he's edited it and cut it down, and so we can't quite put it back together, but it has that intentional naivete, very, very knowing naivete in the drawing of it. These small works, by the way, in the later part of his life, while he had originally done small works as studies for larger works and blown them up, did large paintings, he began to appreciate their potential as small works and began exhibiting them separately. So they can be taken quite seriously, especially near the end of his life. In 1938, he returned to his hometown in Long Island, and he rented a small house that stood directly on the shore of a mill pond in Centerport. And he had a history of, at that point, serious health problems and had to live a rather sedentary life and really couldn't go much beyond his immediate neighborhood. And he turned that limitation into an opportunity to experiment again with form and medium. And there's a very interesting diary entry for August 5th, 1942, in which he's telling himself to work at the point where abstraction and reality meet. Okay. He also produced a number of paintings and drawings in those Centerport that are as purely non-representational as works from the earlier part of his career. Very strong, exceedingly strong. You're seeing it very, very large. It's still strong as a small watercolor. I should imagine that many of you know Charles Burchfield, because when you've known one Charles Burchfield, you tend to be able to recognize him. He's one of our great American painters and a very mystical artist, very personal artist, went his own way from Ohio, Salem, Ohio, originally. And he painted most of his adult life paintings that were sourced from childhood visions, not just dreams, really visions that he carried with him. We can't doubt this. This was not some sort of pose. Burchfield was born in 1893, died in 1967. Night of the Equinox, as this is called, is dated 1917-55. What that means in Burchfield's work, when you see that huge leap, it doesn't mean that he fell asleep like Rip Van Winkle. It doesn't mean anything other than in 1917 he did a smaller watercolor, and in 1955 he looked at it, saw a new potential, added sheets of paper to it, and made a new composition around it or next to it. And he did this so well. If you look at that very carefully in the galleries, you can find the seams of the paper, I think, but he was very good at disguising those seams. This is a powerful work. It's a mystical vision of nature in turmoil, which suggests the ancient belief that the vernal equinox caused an upheaval in nature. It is rhapsodic, it's a word you can use about his work often, like many of his paintings, came from those childhood memories. And this painting source was the memory of a violent storm that he saw from a window overlooking the backyard of his parents' home in Salem, Ohio. It was, he said, one of the most exciting weather events of the whole year. He'd love today. I mean, today as in this year. He said what we called the spring equinoctial storm. And it's just a deluge. It's the most amazing, violent work. And it also belongs, in its own way, in the major tradition of American transcendentalism, starting in the early 19th century and never really stopping, finding the divine, as it were, the divine power in nature. We go from one wonderful painting to wonderful painting, but they're different, aren't they? Paul Cadmus, born in 1904, died in 1999. Night in Bologna, 1958. Egg tempera, which he used most of his life in painting. Egg tempera on fiberboard, a large painting, 50 inches high. Cadmus, I should say first that this museum is so fortunate. It has probably his two most famous, perhaps greatest paintings, this one and the wonderful painting of Bar Italia, which is very different from this. And then a set of three paintings and other works, many other works by Cadmus. Cadmus had first visited Italy in 1932-33. He was very young. He lived in Mallorca for a while and then visited Italy from Majorca, and then after that, he had a long sojourn in Italy, about 2 years, in 1952-3, post-war, which had a major influence upon him, because both of the paintings I mentioned, this one and Bar Italia, are about post-war Italy, and they are satirical, in especially Bar Italia, which is sensational and packed with vitriolic caricatures. Night in Bologna is a different sort. It comes along a few years later and is much more pondered. It's much darker. It is more pondered in its pictorial construction. It's far more focused and edited in its content. He borrows the famous arcades that Bologna, the city of Bologna, is known for as a stage for his perspective. I use that word advisedly, his perspective on sexual hunger and loneliness. The soldier eyes the prostitute. The prostitute eyes the timid traveler. Do they need to be pointed out? Oops, so that's a detail. I'll leave it there, and then I'll back up. She is here, and over here, and the focus is, when it's blown up that much, there is no focus, but it's quite clearly drawn, and I realize that he's a rather young man, as little as his head is, with his suitcase beside him. It's transitory lust between three people who have had no connection. And he captures it in a timeless environment. These arcades, its emotional need parceled into architectural cells. This is very fine picture making, and it's very fine narrative at the same time. And should you doubt, the identity of the woman, for instance, I give you his own words. Now, Paul Cadmus had a fondness, some would say weakness, for symbols. In this case, it's 3 of the 7 deadly sins, and he explained his intent here. The soldier is in red light, which comes from above. It's very clear when you're in front of it, and strikes not only him, but where he lies, where he stands, the foot is, and so forth. The woman is in red light, lust. The woman is in golden yellow light, money, avarice. And the yellow light is not just this pool of light, but coming through there in the painting, it's clearly yellow. And then she wears this golden dress and has an unusually large bag-like purse, which can only be meant to call attention, I think, to avarice. I can't imagine any other reason, although my fashion knowledge of that year in Italy is not very good. The traveler is in a green light, envy. Now again, it doesn't even read as green in reproduction, but this open door, it's a clear green light, almost lime green, that spills across the floor with the same color, and the side of the suitcase is green as well. Just to say that Paul was very helpful at such details, but I don't think you need them. I don't think you need them. I think the painting has far greater immediacy than that, and far greater power without the particular gloss. How different could it be? Dark to light. We have a painting by an artist you probably don't know, Wynn Chamberlain, who was born in 1928 and I think is still with us. Wynn Chamberlain painted this painting in 1958. It's called The Barricade. It is painted in egg tempera on fiberboard. Once again, this suddenly a great generation of tempera painters. It has, it occurs to me, some similarities with Andrew Wyeth's work. The high hill, for one thing, the way he likes to isolate a building at the top of the hill. The single figure, also, sort of out there, isolated in there. And even the oddity of this, which is the oddest thing in the painting, of this, quote, barricade at the front. Andrew Wyeth had an eye for odd pieces of metalwork and so forth, but I've never seen anything quite like this. It's carefully constructed, this barricade, very carefully. It's not casual. All this links together and is fastened together, one thing to another. Part of it has netting or wire. Others are the boards here, but everything is interlinked, except possibly this little bit of a fence post down here, of a fence rail down there. By the way, you can see in such a large, what the texture is like with tempera. You're not that aware of it in front of it, but it does have this very precise quality to it, and it takes a lot of time to work with this medium. In the 1950s, when he did this, Chamberlain painted landscapes and interiors and allegories, and in the 1960s, he's turned from representation to symbolic, gestural abstraction. There's the cutting moment, the cutting edge, the split. Philip Evergood. I wish everybody knew Philip Evergood's paintings. He somehow manages to be not as well known as he should be, but he was a wonderful artist. 1973, this painting of 1952, Dowager in a Wheelchair. Oil on fiberboard, big painting, 4 feet high. Evergood also evolved, as others did, from social realism to a concern with the individual's isolation and dependence upon spiritual resilience. Evergood has many different takes on the world, and he is a hard artist to follow from painting to painting, but this one is, I think, splendid. In 1958, by the way, artists are not usually this helpful, but after the Roby Foundation acquired this, I'm quite sure that the questionnaire that I read about was from the Roby Foundation to the artist, asking him about the painting, to tell the story, as it were. Well, he did. Once, he said, I saw a tragic old lady being wheeled on Madison Avenue. She was alive in spirit, but her body was only half functioning. She wanted still to be young. A young, gentle, fascinatingly fresh companion was wheeling her. As I passed, spring was in the air. A delicate whiff of lilac perfume mixed with a faint background of crushed rose petals reached my nostrils and then my brain. I was disturbed. I stopped when they passed and followed their progress through the crowds with my eyes. Taxis and cars were too noisy. I lost sight of them in a few moments. I went sadly on my way with a vivid memory which lingered on. I consider the painting to be one of the very best I ever painted. There's one thing you shouldn't miss when you're looking at this wonderful dowager holding center stage one more time. And the wonderful contrast with that loud taxi. The yellow is very loud indeed. And the wonderful play of these two women, the parallelisms of the hats, the faces, and the contrast of the ages. But it's so beautifully done. But have you looked at the window on the right-hand side, upper corner? See that? There's a nude in the window. She's a woman in front of her mirror. She's fixing her hair. Her back is to the window. She's got high heels on. And she's surely a figment of the artist's imagination. This is artistic license. I don't believe in Madison Avenue any of the apartments looked out this way. But he wants to make the play. He wants to go from that to the woman in the chair. In lesser hands, it would be, I don't know, it would be awful, but it's not. It has wit, and it sparks the picture in its own way. One of our great painters, and everybody knows this, I think, is Edward Hopper. Hopper was born in 1882. He died in 1967. This painting of 1950 is called Cape Cod Morning. It's a large painting. It's a standard large 34 by 40 inches, but it has such impact, as his art often does. Hopper and his wife divided their years between their home in Manhattan on Washington Square and summers on Cape Cod. And this is a little bit like, well, like Wyeth dividing his life between two places, Pennsylvania and Maine. And it's very interesting. They just absorb those places, and Hopper in particular has an affinity for the dunescape, as I think of it, of the Cape, the shifting dune landscape there. This is typical Hopper in one sense. You know, in Hopper, 2 is a crowd, not 3, 2. And 1 is usually enough. And he frequently just has one figure. And he knows exactly how to play the isolations of figures in a place, in a space, if there are 2, one from the other, and so forth. And in all of them, virtually in all of them, we are out here. No matter how closely we see them, we don't feel that we are voyeurs. He does use windows, and that is voyeurism, but we don't feel that. They don't seem to have any awareness. I don't know how he makes that feeling that they're unaware of the artist, because the model was always his wife, almost always, and she was obviously such a good model that she didn't feel self-conscious anymore. Well, this painting is notable for its stringent editing of the visual world that he sees. It's sparse, it's intent, it's focused. The angular house pushing into the picture and into the soft landscape, imposing itself on that. They don't seem to belong together. Hopper and windows, here is a woman in the morning, as it says in the title, who is isolated in this bay window interior, contained, and she peers out at the day with what? Unease, not anticipation. She's tense. She's tense. Order and anxiety are balanced. Her anxiety against the order of the architecture. The light is extraordinarily well handled. That table lamp is on because not long ago it was dark. That's very clever. It establishes time of day, but more than that, it gives him a chance to play with that light and the daylight which comes through a window onto her, through a window we can't see, the center window, and picks her up. But it's not like an actress on a stage. It's like a woman in absolute, intense waiting as she looks out at that landscape. The light does wonderful things, and his color is extraordinary. He loves blues, and I mean blues, count them. So many different blues. In the shadows, whites have blue in them, and so forth, the blue of the sky. But also he plays with light inside. For instance, that's a shade, or perhaps a valence, but I think a shade, just as it is here. There we see the outside, here we see the inside lit by the daylight coming in, just the same light that lights the edge of the window opening here. Dealing with primary colors, but these primary colors are just slightly shifted off pure primaries and given more complexity than that. It's a painting that you ought to come back to see again and again, and it's usually hanging in the museum even when the show is not going to be up. It's one of the stars of the museum, as it should be, and it bears continual visits, continual looking. This painting is such a splendid painting to just see. People don't see it very often, don't know it very often. Honoré Scharrer, you've not heard of her probably, unless you looked at the art market, art dealers over the last few years. I'll explain that in a moment. But born in 1920, she didn't die until 2009. It's Tribute to the American Working People, 1951. It's a big painting with a lot of panels here, but it's 77 inches wide. She first studied with her mother, who had been a pupil of George Luke's. That's not a bad person for her mother to have studied with. And then her daughter, studied at the California School of Fine Art, and then she went to Yale, and that's important to note, and I'll come back to it. During World War II, Honoré Char was a welder in a San Francisco shipyard. This painting is very close in style and subject to the WPA-era murals by George Biddle, which are over in the Department of Justice. But the format, together with the unrealistic scale of the factory and the naive perspective of the buildings and the interiors in the small panels, is obviously derived from early Renaissance altarpieces. The whole setup here, including the, Ancona-shaped roof of the factory in the center part, all of this says early Renaissance. Well, Yale was and is the home of the Jarvis collection, which was one of the first great collections of early Italian painting to come into an American museum. Plus, they taught tempera painting at Yale, too. She, I think, did not paint in tempera, but she certainly picked up on the proper, a way to borrow an old form and make it important. Now, tribute to the American working man. In a Renaissance altarpiece, the center panel would have a saint, and the side panels would show scenes from his life. Her saint is the working man, and she knew something about it, given her welding experience, for instance. And I want to show you, because it's hard to see otherwise, I'm going to go quickly through the 4 side panels and then back to the center. I'll go from top left to top right, top left, sorry, to bottom left, and then over to the other 2, although they relate in a little different way in the way they're set up in subject matter. Here's the top left, which is obviously, I think it's sometimes called a county fair. It looks more like a roadside stand, or 2, because there's another one back here. And people have stopped their cars and are walking over or back from this, and it is a stand. Their truck is behind, and they've got various canned goods and so forth, bottled goods, pardon me, which they are selling, and other things associated around here. Almost all the participants here are women, except the young boy and one man seated. Everyone else, I think, is a woman, which may or may not be important in this painting. I love details like the sheaved wheat, which they've decorated their stall with, disguising the wood. And the boy doing a handstand right at the front of the picture does get your attention. If you look at his face for a while, you get a little dizzy. This is the one just below it, an interior in a small town house, the living room with the family gathered, everything you might expect from that date. Radio over here, the gentleman in this chair listening to it, the family piano here, the bored child here, and so forth. The daughter fixing her mother's hair here, I presume. It's a delightful a delightful invocation of something she knew very well. Others of us have seen similar scenes, and she beautifully captures it. Across to the other side, the top one, all men here, with the exception, well, maybe no exceptions. One girl, perhaps. Is that a young girl back here? I think. Not sure, but in any event, mostly men, and one of them doing a strange dance with a rooster on his head. And so there's a name for this, but I never had a chance to do the research to find this. The boy carrying a melon, what looks like a rutabaga, and 2 ears of corn in his pockets, right here in the foreground, admiring the dancing. A man who's either danced or worked too much, who's cooling his feet in the water. He always reminds me, and always has, by the way, not just tonight. Every time I look at that, I think of Waiting for Godot. He looks hopeless in this point, but there he is, cooling his feet. Boy here with a dead rabbit that he's brought in and is showing to us on the left-hand side, and below that is a wonderful schoolroom. a schoolroom with, in which race plays a role, and a very positive one. She is not just does she have some black children here, but she has this young black girl with the young white girl here and her arm around her, and it's a nice bit of all-American for 1951. Pretty good. And then we've got a photograph or copy of one of Gilbert Stuart's George Washington on the wall. That has to be there. Lots and lots of intriguing details here and what they're drawing and so forth. I love the boy who just sits quietly here. Is it a timeout? I don't know. But in the corner. All of these details are fun to parse. And then you go back to the center where you can see it more clearly in this small factory, like a toy factory, but it gives you a chance to have the working man elevated just as a saint would be shown in hieratic scale, not real scale, in front of this. So the working man stands full length in front of this with three-story building with something going on in every window, all of them worth looking at. There's the boss up there, I think. And there's a lot of machinery that peeks in around that point. We have lots of intriguing things, including somebody whose backside we see because he's bending over into the picture to pick something up. I mean, she is having great fun with this, with the potential of these windows, as well as making her social point, as it were. Back to the whole painting so you can see where everything belongs. In the last 4 or 5 years of her long life, she was, quote, rediscovered, hiding in plain sight in upper New York State, rediscovered by the Spanierman Gallery in New York City, which did 1 or 2 exhibitions of her work, which got good reviews, probably sold a number of things, and most of all, I should think at that age, recognition. She'd never stopped painting, though she had changed her style. George Tooker, 1920 to 2011. It's called In the Summer House, painted in 1958. It's tempera, which he learned from Paul Cadmus, who learned it from it, so on and so forth. 24 inches square. It's really quite small, and I'm always struck when I see it that I've enlarged it in my mind. I always think it's a bigger painting than it is, but these are small figures in a small painting, and they're hushed, and they're extremely beautiful. It's a night scene, lit only by these lamps, but look, there's only one face with of the two with an expression, and it's a somber expression, to put it mildly. Tooker's usually somber. Tooker is a very inward painter. Tooker was a very existential painter. And he himself said in this very building during a panel on the Roby exhibition that he found this painting too sentimental, only by his rather stoic standards, perhaps, but not for most of us. Exceptionally beautiful. The glow of the lanterns is terrific, and I couldn't help going from it to 2 more glowing paintings. This one, how different it is, but what a wonderful painting by Morris Graves, 1910 to 2001. It's called Hibernation, 1954. Watercolor. And you must know that Graves lived much of his life on an island in Puget Sound, surrounded by nature. And so animals and birds were his subjects. And this animal has been identified as a mink, which I might have eventually been able to do with a little help from Google. But there is the figure curled up. The wonderful glow, the radiant glow of this. Now, Graves was a mystical painter. And no question about that. He was a protege and close friend of Mark Tobey, whom I'll show you next, who was also a mystical painter. They are both Northwest U.S. artists, and that is perhaps factored into this. These Orioles have been compared to mandalas, and that may be in it, but what I keep seeing here that keeps drawing me back to it is this egg-like shape with the hibernating mink in it. I see it more in terms of birth and growth and genesis. in that sense of the word. Here is the Mark Toby, which glows in its own wonderful way. It is called Canticle, painted in 1954. Mark Toby was born in 1890, lived till 1976. This is painted with casein. I want to say casein, but I think it's casein, C-A-S-E-I-N. Milk solids are the medium for the pigment. And so you get a surface, I suppose, not unlike tempera, in which it would be, you'd have to work it with a certain diligence to give it the extraordinary detail that you find in the paintings of Mark Toby. This is about 12 inches high. That's all. Toby's paintings, of course, are also abstract. There's no way around that. They may have spiritual meaning, they do, but they're abstract paintings. Calligraphy had a lot to do with this. Both Arabic and Japanese calligraphy were influences upon him. He loved music, and the title, Canticle, suggests that. And he was quoted as saying that when I play the piano for several hours, everything is clarified in my visual imagination afterwards. William Thone, an artist I don't know outside the Roby collection. I love this watercolor called Pine Trees, 1955. Born in 1906, lived till 2000. I'm noticing, are you, how long some of these artists live? Art must be good for the longevity. Thone, after World War II, settled in Port Clyde, Maine, and his subjects were the subjects along the coast. And what he's done here is take something that's a landscape subject, he calls it Pine Trees, but it seems more to me, at least, like a still life in the way it's set up. It seems closer than a landscape, and or at least back and forth. And I find it extraordinary. It's watercolor and ink on paper, and I find it extraordinarily beautiful, in short. An artist named Bernard Perlin, P-E-R-L-I-N, 1918 to 2014. The Farewell, 1952, casein again on fiberboard, about 47 inches wide. It is a large painting, and it's a beautiful painting. The red in this painting is almost indescribable. It flows through the ground. Why? Why is the ground in this wintry forest red? Almost like a forest fire. It's so warm, so hot even in places, and it fluctuates. It's an extraordinary visual effect, a remarkable handling of color. The trees are, as I say, winter trees, but there is something strange in the middle here. Doesn't show in this, except up here. Do you see the green that's up here? It's a kind of copper green, and it actually runs all the way down through that center, roughly that center vertical. So there's a what? Sense of impending leaf, however, very abstractly done. The title, The Farewell, what is it? Our label upstairs suggests a narrative. Well, yes, as do the people in it, of course, whom you've probably found. One over here and two over here on the left. The one over here is a young man, or 30-something, with auburn hair, hands in pockets, bent slightly as though thinking as he walks off to the right. Man over here, auburn hair, with the same high forehead, high hairline as over here. I think undoubtedly the father and mother, who's dressed all in black as though she's lost something, as though a great tragedy had occurred, as though there were a death. I didn't know what to make of it, and so I didn't try to make anything of it. And I'm going to make this next remark very brief because I'm not going to back it up with any images. But there is another painting of his, which I saw, which was painted just 4 years after this, which is called The Bar. And when I saw it, or saw the photograph of it, I was certain that Perlin was gay. And that cast a whole new light back on this. Well, I didn't have time to write a book about it, so I Googled, since knowing he had died recently. He died on the 16th of January, and the New York Times had a marvelous obit and said the death was confirmed by his niece, and near the end of the obit said he is also survived by his husband, Edward Newell. His Ridgefield, Connecticut hometown paper, they had lived there for, well, the hometown newspaper starts, he was the husband of Edward Newell, and at the end of the article says they were partners for 57 years. I dated back 57 from 2013 and 1956, which is when the bar was painted. They met that year. 2 years later, they moved to Ridgefield and lived there, and he painted there for the rest of their life. I'm glad he lived long enough to have the wedding. Robert Vickrey. Robert Vickrey, 1926-2011. Tempera on paperboard. He had a BA from Yale, and then he studied with both Kenneth Hayes Miller and Reginald Marsh. I mean, this is like a ground here at the Art Students League, of course, and then to Yale. He, in 1957, began traveling internationally for Time magazine to do sketches and illustrations. He did numbers of covers for Time as well. He then developed his own a private theme of his, not his only theme, but he developed a long series, an ongoing series of paintings of nuns, or in which nuns exist. And they exist in odd places. This is an odd place with or without a nun. We don't know where we are in this painting. It's called Fear, and Vickrey did say that if you look closely in all of my paintings, there is fear. And I'll write, if you say so. I say that because many of his nun pictures, which are often small, this is large, have a wit to them, both in color and attitude, and seem enjoyable. Fear here does not seem enjoyable. It's 58 inches wide. This is a big tempera painting. It took a lot of work to accomplish this. He referred to this nun as a nun fleeing the rubble and erosion of contemporary civilization, which I suppose the bricks lying on the right side suggest as well. That's the kind of slightly portentous remark that Paul Cadmus often made too, in allegorizing, as it were, his paintings. I don't think that they necessarily gain from it because the painting is so strong simply in its enigma. I don't even get the feeling necessarily that she's running. I often just see her as having stopped and thrown her hands back in amazement at the architecture she sees in front of her. I'm sure somebody once told me that also had something to do with Coney Island after it was closed up, but I'm not sure that I have a correct memory there. Moving on from Vickrey, there is nowhere to put this in the slide lecture here, and nowhere that it doesn't jump out at you, and there was nowhere in the exhibition upstairs to put it except at the end, where it is and where it belongs, both in date, 1973, as the foundation was beginning to consider winding up their acquisitions. It's a big painting. It's acrylic on canvas, about 6 feet wide, and it is by an artist named Roy DeForest, born in 1930 and died in 2007, and it's called The Real Inside Story. And in the context of the Roby collection, or any collection practically, it jumps out. The colors are fantastic. They're wonderful, but they don't mince, well, they're just pure color. He doesn't try to be subtle about it. But it also jumps out because in style there's a kind of neo-primitivism here. The figures in pure profile, the blue Assyrian at the left, which seems to come out of Assyrian art, ancient art, And then there is also a profile man's head on the right in that doorway. I just point out, without drawing conclusions, so you don't miss some of the figures. The dog here, the big one, and the pied horse outside. By the way, you realize that the horse isn't just the head. This frames it so much we tend to forget that the rest of him is in the doorway back here, legs and all, and another dog looking in at the doorway, one eye. But I find, I don't know, this window of domestication between dog and horse I find intriguing. There is nothing literal that you're going to get from this, and Roy DeForest knew this. He described himself. He said, I'm an eccentric individual creating fantasy art with the amazing intention of building a miniature cosmos into which the artful alchemist could retire with all his friends, animals, and paraphernalia. And he also said that art is one of the last strongholds of magic. That's true, surely. You won't be surprised that he was a California artist. He also said he was on the Roby panel here, and he remarked that he was in the desert once, and he looked up at the sky, and suddenly there was a dog in the sky, because somebody asked him about his dogs there in all his paintings. But there was this dog in the sky, and he said, I took out my sketchbook, and I immediately made a picture of it. And I was so glad I did, because when I came back that afternoon, it wasn't there. From one of the biggest, maybe the biggest in the show, to one of the smallest. This is Gregory Gillespie, 1936 to 2000, Landscape with Perspective, kind of loaded title there. 1975, it's about 12 inches high. It's oil and acrylic and collage all together. Very meticulously painted, obviously, but it is reminiscent to many people who see it of Hieronymus Bosch, of some of those works of hell. The title is interesting because perspective, suggests instantly Renaissance perspective. Well, there are several attempts at perspective here, moving back in space up here, street of all things, but it doesn't stand up against the sort of crowding to the foreground of everything else in the picture, the tilting, rising picture plane, and these strange melting, metamorphosing forms which are embedded in the landscape and which simultaneously attract and repel us. And I will show you the bottom part here so you can get a little closer into it. The closer you get, the harder it is to get out, I warn you. But there seems often to be an incipient violence lurking just below this richly rendered surface. That's the bottom two-thirds, and with that stream, if that's what it is, of white coming down from inside the hill and then stopping rather abruptly. Good, because there's a house down here that would just as soon avoid destruction. There's the upper part, where there are equally strange things. On the left-hand side, you see a quite conventional sort of abbey building here, perhaps a country church, perhaps something not. Perhaps a farmhouse building instead, another on the hill here. All of that seems perfectly normal. On the other side in the corner, like an old Hollywood set for a Western, right? With the houses on both sides and the main street going down the middle. It's a pure profile with figures walking on it, and then this break in that, and you have completely, it's a continuation, but completely unconnected, is a half of a girl. You see the little girl's face? Arm, leg, it's cut off by this shell-like form by which she is partly covered. On the other side, there's a hat, but I don't think any man to go with it. Not sure. Right here, it is. Well, here's the whole thing again, just so you remember it when you see it. I haven't shown you still life, and remember that Sara Roby herself was a still life painter, a painter of still lifes, and I wanted to show you two paintings in the collection by artists she collected. This is a painting of 1972 by Bruce Kurland, who was born in 1938. It is called, quite accurately, Bone, Cup, and Crabapple. It's all there. Oil on fiberboard. It's about 10 inches wide. It is, notice that it's at eye level. In fact, we're slightly below, because our eye level actually comes in a little below, I think, below that cup handle, so that this bone gains even a little more in presence, raised slightly. Everything so simple and so perfect. This is a terrific still life painter, and she must have been delighted to find it, because the collection also owns Isabel Bishop's still life from 41 years earlier, 1931, which has such kinship with it. So beautiful. She was 29 years old when she painted this work, and it's the artist's table. That's the title, and it's obviously very personal. It's her painting materials just waiting for use. Especially since the drawer in the foreground gives us where the artist stands, as it were, or sits, and is opened for us. And that neutral background suggests a surface waiting to be painted. It's evocative even while it's very, very descriptive. I thought I'd put them together to see how nicely they work together. Eye level both times. One more Isabel Bishop and then one closer. I saved this one for last because I told you she never stopped painting, and here in 1980, when she would have been 78 years old, she painted students, entrance to Union Square, coming up from the subway, entering Union Square. An artist who can paint a subject of youth, about youth, with such humanism, with such a living quality, is to be honored at any time. To be able to do this at her point in life was, I think, extraordinary. And this painting has an evanescent quality, somewhat like the man mending his clothes, but in a very different way. It's a fine painting, and I show it to you just before, painted in the same year. This was painted in 1980. The next painting was by her just older contemporary, Raphael Sawyer, born in 1899 and who died in 1987, this Annunciation, as it's called. Oil on linen, 50 inches wide. It's a nearly square painting. It's mysterious, it's suggestive, it's concentrated, it's melancholy, it's resonant with unexplained mysteries. After all, it is a realistic setting. It is a corner of the studio, surely. Maybe they were models for Sawyer as he was building one of his multi-figure compositions, and they've now finished modeling. They're behind, there seems to be a partition or a folding panel to the right with clothes thrown over it. But these two young women, so close in the space, do not look at each other. The one leaning against the back wall with that one foot so marvelously placed on the other is looking at the other wall. And so this is an utterly silent and yet absolutely beautiful, absolutely empathetic. We are drawn to them. There's nothing odd in an off-putting sense. We're drawn into this, but we have no real understanding of why. I don't presume to understand what he meant by Annunciation in this case, but there is one thing in this visually that is sacred. It's a very old image of covered hands. When the Magi present their gifts to the Christ child, their hands are covered. And when priests, etc., the covering of the hands is a very ancient symbol. Here, it's a towel, but it's carried with such significance. Raphael Sawyer adored the work of Thomas Eakins. Absolutely did. In this painting, by the way, just as with Isabel Bishop's, there is youth, an old artist painting youth. There is humanism. There is a life that is really unquenchable. He's a great painter, and this is a wonderful painting. And I thank you for your attention. And if I haven't talked right past Q&A, we can entertain questions, and if you have some and you would take a position at one of the mics, that would be terrific. And I'd be glad to answer any, or try to address any questions that you might have. And if not, we can see you down front. Anyone? Any hands? Okay. Thank you again.